Jake stared at his laptop screen, the cursor blinking on a half-finished paragraph. The clock showed 2:47 a.m., but sleep felt impossible. For the third straight night, he found himself wide awake, wrestling with thoughts that wouldn't quiet down. His small apartment felt smaller tonight. The walls seemed to press in on him as he sat at his tiny kitchen table, surrounded by books and research papers. Being a graduate student meant lots of late nights, but lately, even his studies couldn't distract him from the emptiness that had settled in his chest. 3 months ago, his dad passed away suddenly. Heart attack at 58. Jake still couldn't believe it. One day they were talking about weekend plans. The next day he was planning a funeral. The grief hit him in waves, sometimes out of nowhere. Tonight was one of those nights. He lived alone in Riverside Apartments, a 3-story building that had seen better days. The rent was cheap, which worked perfectly for a broke student. His neighbors were mostly young professionals and other students like him. Everyone kept to themselves, which Jake appreciated. At least he used to appreciate it. The building had paper-thin walls. Jake could hear Mrs. Chen upstairs watching her late-night cooking shows. The couple in 3B often played music too loud on weekends. And lately, there had been other sounds from the apartment next door that made him uncomfortable. At first, he thought it was just normal couple arguments. Everyone fights sometimes, right? But over the past few weeks, the sounds had gotten worse. Loud voices, things being thrown, doors slamming hard enough to shake his own walls. The woman's voice often sounded scared, pleading. Jake tried to mind his own business. He put on headphones, turned up his music, focused on his research. But tonight something was different. The sounds weren't just loud arguments anymore. Around midnight it started again. This time the man's voice was angrier than Jake had ever heard. The woman was crying, begging. There was a crash that sounded like furniture being thrown. Then silence. Then more crashes. Jake stood up from his table and walked to the wall they shared. He pressed his ear against it, his heart pounding. He could hear muffled sobbing and what sounded like someone moving around frantically. What should he do? Call the police? What if he was wrong? What if they were just having a really bad fight? He didn't even know their names. He'd seen the woman a few times in the hallway. She was probably in her mid-20s, always kept her head down, never made eye contact. The man was bigger, older, always seemed irritated about something. Jake paced around his small living room. His phone sat on the coffee table and he picked it up several times, then put it back down. His hands were shaking. After losing his dad, the last thing he wanted was to get involved in someone else's crisis. He had enough problems of his own, but the sounds weren't stopping. If anything, they were getting worse. Jake had always been the quiet type. In high school, he was the kid who sat in the back, did his homework, stayed out of drama. In college, he focused on his grades and avoided parties. Even now, as a graduate student working on his psychology degree, he preferred books to people. Real-life confrontations terrified him. His dad used to tell him stories about standing up for people who couldn't stand up for themselves. His dad had been a mechanic, worked with his hands, wasn't afraid of anyone. Sometimes, Jake, he'd say, you have to do what's right, even when it scares you. Jake always admired that about his father, but he never thought he had that same courage. Tonight felt different, though. Maybe it was the grief making him more sensitive. Maybe it was the loneliness of the past few months. Or maybe it was just that the sounds from next door had crossed a line from uncomfortable to genuinely frightening. Another crash. This one was so loud that a picture frame fell off Jake's wall. The woman's voice was different now, not just scared but desperate, like someone running out of options. Jake's stomach twisted. He couldn't concentrate on anything else. His research, his worries about school, even his grief about his dad, everything faded into the background. All he could think about was the terror in that woman's voice. He walked to his front door and looked through the peephole. The hallway was empty and dimly lit by one flickering fluorescent light. Everything looked normal, but he could still hear the commotion from next door. His phone felt heavy in his hand. 911. 3 simple numbers. But what would he say? I think my neighbors are fighting. That seemed so inadequate for what he was hearing. And what if he was overreacting? What if they just liked to argue loudly? But deep down, Jake knew this wasn't just an argument. This was something more serious. Something that could end very badly if someone didn't do something. The sound suddenly stopped. Complete silence. Jake held his breath, waiting. Had it ended? Had someone left? Or had something terrible happened? The silence stretched on. 5 minutes? 10 minutes. Jake started to relax slightly. Maybe it was over. Maybe they had worked it out. Maybe he had been overreacting after all. He was about to return to his laptop when he heard footsteps in the hallway. Fast footsteps. Someone running. Then a sound that made his blood run cold. Someone trying to open his door. The handle turned, once, twice, then stopped. Jake's heart hammered against his ribs. He stood frozen in his living room, staring at his door. Had he locked it? He always locked it, but tonight, with everything on his mind, had he forgotten? The footsteps moved away, then came back. This time the person wasn't trying to be quiet. They were moving frantically, desperately. Jake approached his door slowly. He could hear someone breathing heavily on the other side, like they had been running, or crying, or both. He reached for the deadbolt to make sure it was secure. That's when he realized, in his distracted state tonight, he had forgotten to lock his door after bringing in his mail earlier. Before he could turn the lock, his door slowly pushed open. The door opened slowly and Jake's heart nearly stopped. A young woman stumbled into his apartment, her hair messy and tears streaming down her face. She looked terrified, like someone who had been running for her life. "Please," she whispered, her voice shaking. "Please don't make me go back." Jake stood there, completely frozen. This wasn't something they taught you how to handle in psychology textbooks. This was real life, messy and complicated and scary. The woman looked around his apartment desperately, like she was looking for somewhere to hide. What happened?" Jake managed to ask, though he already had a pretty good idea. She didn't answer with words. Instead, she walked past him toward his bedroom. Jake watched, not knowing what to do or say. Should he stop her? Should he ask more questions? Should he call someone? "I'm sorry," she said, turning back to look at him. "I know this is crazy. I know you don't know me, but I had nowhere else to go." Jake could see now that her clothes were torn. Her shirt had a rip down one side, and there was a small cut on her lip. She was shaking, whether from cold or fear, he couldn't tell. "Are you hurt?" he asked. "Do you need me to call someone, the police, an ambulance?" "No police," she said quickly. "Not yet. I just need a safe place for a few hours. Please." She sat down on the edge of his bed and put her head in her hands. Jake had never seen someone look so exhausted and scared at the same time. It reminded him of how he felt after his dad died, completely overwhelmed and lost. "What's your name?" Jake asked softly. "Lisa," she said. "I live next door. I've seen you in the hallway sometimes." Jake nodded. So his instincts had been right. The sounds he'd been hearing weren't just normal arguments. This woman had been in real danger. "My boyfriend," Lisa continued, her voice barely above a whisper. "He's been drinking more lately, getting angrier about everything. Tonight was different, though. Worse than usual." Jake sat down in the chair across from his bed. He wanted to help, but he had no idea what he was doing. He'd never dealt with anything like this before. "You can stay here as long as you need," he said. "But maybe we should think about calling someone who knows how to handle this kind of situation." Lisa looked up at him with grateful eyes. "Thank you," she said. "I know this is weird. I know you could have just kept your door locked and pretended you didn't hear anything." "I couldn't do that," Jake said, and he realized it was true. Despite his fear, despite not knowing what to do, he couldn't have turned her away. From next door they could hear heavy footsteps and doors slamming. Lisa flinched with each sound. "He's looking for me," she said. He gets really angry when he can't find me. Jake got up and double-checked his door lock. Then he closed his bedroom door and turned off most of the lights. If her boyfriend was looking for her, Jake didn't want to make it obvious that anyone was awake in his apartment. "We need to be quiet," he whispered. Lisa nodded and curled up on his bed, pulling a blanket around herself. She looked so small and scared that Jake felt a protective instinct he'd never experienced before. It was like when his dad used to say that sometimes you have to stand up for people who can't stand up for themselves. "I should have left months ago," Lisa said quietly. "I kept thinking things would get better, that he'd change." Jake didn't know what to say to that. He'd studied psychology, read about difficult relationships, but theory was completely different from sitting across from someone who was actually living it. "It's not your fault," he said, because that much he did know. They sat in silence for a while, listening to the sounds from next door. Eventually, the footsteps stopped. Maybe her boyfriend had given up for the night, or maybe he'd passed out. Either way, the immediate danger seemed to have passed. "I can sleep on the couch," Jake offered. "You can have the bed." "No," Lisa said. "I don't want to be alone right now. Can you just stay in here? You don't have to sleep on the bed, just stay where I can see you." Jake understood. After something traumatic, being alone felt impossible. He'd felt the same way after his dad died, like if he was by himself, all the scary thoughts would take over. He grabbed a pillow and blanket and made himself comfortable on the floor next to the bed. It wasn't the most comfortable sleeping arrangement, but comfort wasn't really the point tonight. "Thank you," Lisa said again. "I know you don't know me, but you probably saved my life tonight." Jake didn't know if that was true, but he knew he'd done the right thing. His dad would have been proud of him for not turning away when someone needed help. As the night wore on, Lisa finally fell asleep, but Jake stayed awake, listening for any signs of trouble from next door. Jake didn't sleep that night. Every small sound from the hallway made him alert, ready to protect Lisa if her boyfriend came looking for her. He'd never thought of himself as the protective type, but something about the situation brought out a side of him he didn't know existed. Around 4 a.m, Lisa woke up suddenly, breathing hard like she'd had a nightmare. "It's okay," Jake said quietly. "You're safe." She looked around, confused for a moment, then remembered where she was. "I'm sorry," she said. "I keep having dreams that he found me." "You don't need to apologize," Jake said. "After what you've been through, it's normal to have trouble sleeping." Lisa sat up and looked at Jake, who was still on the floor with his makeshift bed of pillows and blankets. "You stayed awake all night, didn't you?" she asked. Jake shrugged. "I couldn't sleep anyway. I've been having trouble sleeping for months." "Why?" Lisa asked. Then she quickly added, "Sorry, that's probably too personal. You've already done so much for me." "It's okay," Jake said. "My dad died a few months ago. Since then, nights have been hard." Lisa was quiet for a moment. "I'm sorry," she said. "That must be really difficult." "It is," Jake admitted. "But tonight, helping you, it's the first time in months that I've felt like I was doing something important." They talked quietly as the sun started to come up. Lisa told him more about her situation, how the relationship had started good but gradually gotten worse, how isolated she'd become, how scared she'd been to leave. Jake told her about his dad, about school, about how lonely he'd been feeling. It was strange talking to someone he barely knew about such personal things, but somehow it felt natural. "I think your dad would be proud of you," Lisa said, "for helping me last night." Jake smiled. It was the first genuine smile he'd had in weeks. He always said that good people help others even when it's hard. As morning light filled the apartment, they could hear normal sounds from the building. People getting ready for work, coffee makers starting up, the usual routine of a new day. It felt surreal after the drama of the night. "I need to figure out what to do next," Lisa said. "I can't stay here forever and I can't go back there." Jake had been thinking about this too. "There are places that help people in your situation," he said. "Resources, shelters, people who know how to help you stay safe." "I don't know anything about that stuff," Lisa admitted. We can figure it out together, Jake said. I can help. You research options, make phone calls, whatever you need. Lisa looked surprised. You'd do that? Even though you barely know me? Sometimes helping someone else helps you too, Jake said. I've been stuck in my own problems for months. Maybe this is exactly what I needed. A reminder that other people need help too. Around 7 in the morning, they heard movement from next door again. Lisa tensed up immediately. He's getting ready for work, she whispered. He leaves around 7:30 usually. They waited quietly until they heard footsteps in the hallway and a door closing. Then they heard a car starting in the parking lot. He's gone, Lisa said with relief. Jake went to his window and looked down at the parking lot. He saw a man getting into a pickup truck. The man looked angry even from a distance, slamming his door and driving away too fast. That's him, Lisa confirmed, looking over Jake's shoulder. With her boyfriend gone, Lisa felt safe enough to think about practical things. She needed clothes, important documents, and personal items from her apartment, but she was terrified to go back there alone. I'll go with you, Jake offered. You don't have to do that, Lisa said. I know I don't have to, Jake replied. But I want to help. We'll be quick, get what you need and get out. They spent the next hour planning. Lisa would grab essential items while Jake waited by the door, ready to leave quickly if her boyfriend came back unexpectedly. It felt good to have a plan, something concrete to do. Jake realized that for the first time since his dad died, he wasn't thinking about his own problems. He was focused on helping someone else, and it gave him a sense of purpose he'd been missing. Lisa looked at him gratefully. I don't know how to thank you for all this. You don't need to thank me, Jake said. This is what people should do for each other. As they prepared to go next door, Jake felt nervous, but determined. He was about to help someone rebuild her life, and somehow, he knew it would help him rebuild his own life too. Jake and Lisa had just finished making their plan when they heard footsteps in the hallway. Heavy, angry footsteps that made Lisa's face go white with fear. He's back, she whispered, grabbing Jake's arm. He's supposed to be at work. Why is he back? The footsteps stopped right outside Jake's door. Then came the pounding, loud, aggressive knocks that shook the entire door frame. I know you're in there, a man's voice shouted from the hallway. Open this door right now. Jake's heart was racing, but he tried to stay calm for Lisa's sake. She was shaking so badly she could barely stand. We don't have to answer, Jake whispered. He can't just break in. But the pounding got louder. Other apartment doors in the hallway started opening. Jake could hear neighbors talking, asking what was going on. This is getting out of hand, Jake said. I'm going to call the police. No, Lisa said quickly, then stopped herself. Actually, yes. Maybe it's time. Jake picked up his phone and dialed. His hands were shaking as he explained the situation to the operator. Within 10 minutes, they could hear sirens outside. The pounding on the door stopped. Through his window, Jake could see police cars in the parking lot. 2 officers were walking toward the building. Everything's going to be okay, Jake told Lisa, though he wasn't sure he believed it himself. When the police knocked on Jake's door, their knock was completely different, professional and calm. Jake let them in, and Lisa immediately started crying when she saw them. Officer Rodriguez was a woman in her 40s who seemed to understand the situation right away. She sat down with Lisa and started asking gentle questions about what had happened. The other officer, Officer Chen, talked to Jake about what he had witnessed. You did the right thing by calling us, Officer Rodriguez told them. And you, she said to Jake, you did the right thing by helping her. Lisa's boyfriend was still in the hallway arguing loudly with another police officer. Jake could hear him claiming that Lisa was his girlfriend and she belonged with him. The officer wasn't buying it. Does he have keys to your apartment? Officer Rodriguez asked Lisa. Yes, Lisa said quietly. And he knows where I work, where my family lives. He's told me before that if I ever tried to leave him, he'd find me. Officer Rodriguez nodded knowingly. "We see this a lot," she said. "But there are ways to stay safe. There are people who can help you." She pulled out a card from her pocket and handed it to Lisa. "This is a local organization that helps women in your situation. They have emergency housing, legal help, counseling, everything you need to start over safely." Jake watched as Lisa stared at the card like it was a lifeline. "What happens now?" Jake asked. "We're going to arrest him for disturbing the peace and making threats," Officer Rodriguez explained. "That'll keep him away for at least a few days, but Lisa needs to make some decisions about what she wants to do long term." Lisa looked at Jake. "I don't know how to do any of this," she said. "You don't have to do it alone," Jake replied. "I meant what I said about helping you figure this out." Officer Rodriguez smiled. "It's not often we see neighbors looking out for each other like this. Usually people just try to stay out of it." After the police left with Lisa's boyfriend, the apartment felt strangely quiet. Lisa sat on Jake's couch staring at the card the officer had given her. "I'm scared," she admitted. "What if I call them and it makes everything worse?" "What if you call them and it makes everything better?" Jake countered. Lisa looked at him and managed a small smile. "You're pretty wise for someone who says he doesn't know what he's doing." They spent the rest of the day researching the organization on the card. Jake helped Lisa call them, and they scheduled an appointment for the next day. The woman on the phone was kind and reassuring, explaining that they helped people in Lisa's situation all the time. "Tomorrow feels like the first day of the rest of my life," Lisa said that evening. "I'm terrified, but also hopeful." Jake understood that feeling. It was scary to make big changes, but sometimes scary was better than staying in a bad situation. That night, Lisa slept peacefully for the first time in months. Jake, meanwhile, found himself thinking about his own life. Helping Lisa had given him a sense of purpose he hadn't felt since his dad died. Maybe this was what his dad meant about helping others. Sometimes when you help someone else, you end up helping yourself too. The next morning, Jake went with Lisa to her appointment. At the support center, the building was warm and welcoming, not at all what Jake had expected. The staff treated Lisa with such kindness and respect that Jake could see her confidence growing with each conversation. By the end of the week, Lisa had a new apartment in a different part of town, a restraining order against her ex-boyfriend, and a plan for moving forward. Jake had helped her move her belongings and had even driven her to her first counseling appointment. "I can't believe how much my life has changed in just 1 week," Lisa said as they sat in her new living room surrounded by boxes. "Mine too," Jake admitted. "Helping you has helped me deal with my own stuff. I've been so focused on my grief that I forgot there were other people in the world who needed help." Lisa smiled. "Your dad raised a good son," she said. Jake felt tears in his eyes. It was the first time since his dad's death that someone had said something about him that made Jake feel proud instead of sad. 6 months later, Jake was sitting in his favorite coffee shop working on his laptop. His dissertation was finally coming together, and for the first time in over a year, he felt genuinely excited about his future. "Is this seat taken?" a familiar voice asked. Jake looked up to see Lisa standing there with her own coffee, smiling broadly. She looked completely different from the scared, desperate woman who had stumbled into his apartment that night. Her hair was styled nicely, she was wearing professional clothes, and most importantly, she looked confident and happy. "Lisa," Jake said, standing up to hug her, "you look amazing. How are things going?" "Really well," she said, sitting down across from him. "I got that promotion at work I told you about, and I'm thinking about going back to school part-time." Jake grinned. "That's fantastic. I'm so proud of you." They caught up on everything that had happened since they'd last talked a month ago. Lisa's new life was going better than either of them had dared to hope. She'd made new friends through the support group, was dating someone new who treated her with respect, and had even started volunteering at the same organization that had helped her. "Speaking of volunteering," Lisa said, "they're always looking for people to help with their crisis hotline. I know you're busy with school, but I thought you might be interested." Jake had actually been thinking about something like that. Since helping Lisa, He'd realized that his psychology studies meant more to him when he could apply them to real situations where people needed help. "I'd love to do that," he said. "Can you give me the contact information?" As they talked, Jake reflected on how much both of their lives had changed since that terrible night 6 months ago. What had started as one of the scariest experiences of his life had turned into something that helped both of them grow and heal. "Do you ever think about that night?" Lisa asked, as if reading his thoughts. "All the time," Jake admitted. "Not in a bad way, though. It was the night I learned that I was stronger than I thought I was. It was the night I learned that there are still good people in the world," Lisa replied. "People who will help a stranger just because it's the right thing to do." Jake felt his cheeks warm at the compliment. "I keep thinking about what my dad would say if he could see how things turned out." "What do you think he'd say?" Jake smiled. "Probably something like, 'That's my boy. Always knew you had it in you.'" They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching people walk by outside. Both of them had learned that life could change dramatically in a single night, but they'd also learned that change didn't always have to be something to fear. "I have to get back to work," Lisa said eventually, "but I'm really glad we ran into each other. Same time next month?" "Definitely," Jake said. "And hey, Lisa, thank you." "For what?" "For trusting me that night, for letting me help you. It ended up helping me more than you know." Lisa squeezed his hand. "Thank you for being the kind of person someone could trust in their worst moment." After she left, Jake sat for a while thinking about everything that had happened. His grief over his father's death was still there, but it felt different now. Instead of just feeling sad about what he'd lost, he also felt grateful for what his dad had taught him about being a good person. That evening, Jake called the crisis hotline organization that Lisa had mentioned. He scheduled an interview for the following week to become a volunteer counselor. It felt like the right next step in a journey that had started with a knock on his door in the middle of the night. As he walked home from the coffee shop, Jake passed his old apartment building. He'd moved to a nicer place closer to campus a few months ago, but seeing the building brought back memories of that pivotal night. He thought about all the people in the world who might be going through their own dark moments, wondering if anyone would help them if they needed it. He thought about his dad's words about standing up for people who couldn't stand up for themselves. Jake realized that night 6 months ago hadn't just been about helping Lisa. It had been about discovering who he really was and who he wanted to become. Sometimes the scariest moments in life turn out to be the ones that change everything for the better. He pulled out his phone and texted Lisa, "Thanks for helping me find my purpose." A few minutes later, she texted back, "Thanks for helping me find my strength." Jake smiled as he walked home, feeling grateful for a random night that had changed 2 lives forever.